Okay, so Adorno's point is that art, religion used to teach everybody to be the same, think the same thoughts, believe the same things, and that's not. And now societies don't have one religion to unify them all. They have all kinds of different people who believe all kinds of different things. He says what unifies people now is culture, and the aspect of culture he's interested most in is art, or that's what we're interested in that he writes about. So let's take a look at what he says. Now, some of this is a little old-fashioned and doesn't quite work, but his examples are off. But I'll give you some better examples. Um, so he says films, radio, magazines make up a system which is uniform as a whole and in every part. Even the aesthetic activities of political opposites are one in their enthusiastic obedience to the rhythm of the iron system. Now, this is a little bit confusing for people when they first hear it. This really throws people for a bit of a loop. It confuses people because I bet when you think about all the art that's available for you to look at, it's so different. There's so many different movies you can see in the movie theater. There's so many different television shows you can watch. There's so many, different things you can do in culture. They're so different. And here Adorno is making this claim that seems like you're like, oh, this is from 1947. Maybe he's not talking about the world that I live in, because he's claiming that they make up a system that is uniform, that all the art is like the same. Um, he says, even the. Actually, I'm going to stop there. Um, one of the things you might think about, he has some examples that you're not necessarily going to know as well, but one of the things you might think about that he's talking about is like superhero movies. There are so many different superhero movies, and you probably feel like they're all very different from each other. But they're not really. They have a lot of similarities. These superhero movies. Now, of course, right, there's like Black Panther, and people are like, oh, good, this is like a black lead in a superhero film. This is great. Or Captain Marvel or Wonder Woman has a female lead. But the movies themselves are pretty similar, right? I mean, you've got these superpowered people who punch and use violence to solve all their problems, fighting some kind of super villain and saving the world. There's a similar pattern to them. They're all the same type of movie. And then you're going to say to me, well, Jeff, but aren't there other kinds of movies? So like Fast and the Furious, for example. But then isn't the Fast and Furious basically a superhero movie? I mean, I know they don't have superpowers necessarily, but they might as well. They all can use all weapons. They all can do computer coding. They drive in cars out of airplanes. They're indestructible. There's a scene in Fast and Furious 7 where one of the guys gets hit in the head with a crowbar, and it turns out he's fine. Like if you get hit in the head, if The Rock hits you in the head with a crowbar, you're dead. Like these guys might as well be superheroes. So I think at least one thing to consider here is these films. One of the things Adorno claims, and you're going to have to decide for yourself whether you think this is true, but it's an ugly and complicated thing, is that a lot of the movies are basically the same. And this goes for television shows also. A lot of the television shows are the same. So think about how many shows you've seen about a brilliant cop who wants to catch the guy, but the bosses won't let him because it's like against the rules, and he's like, I'm not gonna follow the rules, I'm gonna do it my own way. There's like 1,000 movies and TV shows where that happens. And then, by the way, if you've ever seen like House, it's the same thing but with a doctor. There's all these rules, and House is like, I'm not gonna follow the rules, I'm doing my own thing. So Adorno's point is that culture, he thinks it gives you the illusion of choice. One way to think about this is sometimes if you're looking at beverages, for example, um, like Americans feel we're free. We have freedom. We can choose. But what are your options? A lot of times your options are Coke or Pepsi. And that is a choice. You get to choose Coke or Pepsi. But like they're very similar things, Coke and Pepsi. And you can tell me they're different, and I know they're a little bit different. But Adorno feels like that difference doesn't really matter. They're basically both forms of soda. Do you want Coke or do you want Pepsi? The choices are there, but they basically amount to the same thing. Now you might say to yourself, and this is going to get slightly more complicated, but you might say to myself, well, I'm not going to have a Pepsi. I'm going to have an Aquafina water. Well, awesome. It's owned by Pepsi. And it's very disturbing when you realize what these companies own and how many things they own, and the choices you're making aren't choices at all. All your money's going to the same, handful of corporations, who are putting out a very similar kind of product. And again, obviously there are other kinds, like so romantic comedies are like a totally different kind of movie. But again, it's not a big choice. It's a very similar kind of thing. These are all like very good looking people who win in the end, and and romantic comedies are very similar to each other. The Hallmark Channel plays Christmas movies. They are comically, ridiculously, ludicrously similar if you've ever seen them. So this is Adorno's real worry, is that culture is essentially the same. Um, he points out next. He says, even the aesthetic activities of political opposites are one in their enthusiastic obedience to the rhythm of the iron system. Now, this is one that came up recently, um, which is that in politics you're given choices of who to vote for. Right? Who are you going to vote? You're going to vote Democrat. You're going to vote Republican. Um, and a lot of people felt like Bernie Sanders offered something a little bit different than we usually get. Bernie Sanders is now dropped out of the race, and what we have left is Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Now, Joe Biden and Donald Trump have some pretty big differences, but Adorno would emphasize that they are both men, they're both white men in their 70s who don't really want things to change that much. Um, they both seem a little, I don't know how to put this, stupid, and they both seem a little bit dopey. They both sort of are, when they speak in public, both Biden and Trump frequently make errors in their speech. They seem very confused a lot of the time. They both have claims about sort of disrespecting women's boundaries. Um, they seem to, anyway, they both have problems with sort of how to treat women. They just, and by the way, there are key differences between Biden and Trump, and I don't mean to suggest don't vote. Please vote. But the thing about Adorno's point is that what the hell kind of choice is this? We go, well, in America, this other country over here, they have a dictator, but in America, we get to vote for who's president. But what if the two options seem awfully similar? And again, they're not exactly similar. There's some key differences. But Adorno would emphasize how similar these two guys are. What the hell kind of choice is this? It's not really a choice. Just like when you go to see movies, you're like, oh boy, am I going to go see Doctor Strange or Iron Man? Well, they're both movies about rich white guys who have goatees and they're very egotistical and selfish, but by the end of the movie, they learn that they shouldn't be egotistical and selfish because they should help other people. It's the same movie twice. What the hell kind of choice is that? Culture offers you, Adorno says, the illusion of truth, because a lot of the artistic products that it makes are exactly the same over and over and over again. I mean, I could do examples of this all day. Um, but like, you might want to think about movies where there's like sequel after sequel after sequel after sequel, and all the sequels are basically the same. You feel like you've seen these things already. You've seen one, you've seen them all. Um, so everything's, and I'll tell you this is a really depressing thing to say, and I'll tell you this. When I was younger, when I was like 20, I was very excited about all the new movies that were coming out, and I would excitedly rush to the movie theaters to see all of them. But one of the reasons that I was so excited is because I hadn't seen that many movies when I was 20. Now that I'm in my 40s, I've seen a fuck ton of movies. I've seen a lot of movies. And now, when something's in the movie theater, I feel like so much of it is just the same. Like I already saw this movie already. They're just remaking the same movie over and over and over again. And yes, there's some variations. Um, which is why you have to kind of hunt around to find the unusual movies like The Lighthouse, or even Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is, I think, an unusual one. But I'm always hunting for unusual movies, but most of the time I'm getting smashed into a movie I've already seen. For example, last night I watched a movie with Kristen Stewart because I really like Kristen Stewart. I think she's fucking cool and I think she's smart. But she was in a movie called Underwater, and it's a movie about sort of a facility underwater, and there's an earthquake or something, and they have to escape from the bottom of the ocean or whatever. And then it turns out there's monsters down there. And I swear to God, they already did this movie, 1979, Alien. It's the same fucking movie. Now, Alien was in space, and Underwater is underwater, but they're basically the exact same movie, including the fact that the person who survives and kills all the monsters is a good-looking woman who wears panties when she does it, and no pants. So it's just it's a Adorno's point, and it's a depressing one, is that culture just repeats itself over and over